Hello, Bellingham. This is Michael Connors, Chairman of the Bellingham Select Board. I'm joined today by Cindy McNulty, the Vice Chair. We have two special guests today, which we will introduce shortly. As part of our COVID discussions, we've learned that there's a great deal of misinformation, but there's also a great deal of excellent projects that are occurring in town. And we thought that we would run a three-part series focusing on the north, central, and south part of Bellingham and share with you all of the developmental opportunities that we have going on. Cindy?
As Michael pointed out, we're joined by two special guests. We have Town Administrator Dennis Frayne and Town Planner Mr. Jim Kupfer. And we thought we'd start out today just by walking the residents through what's the typical process to have a new development coming from permitting to actually building the property. Yep. You want to start off, Jim?
Excellent. Yeah. Well, thanks for having us. I think this is a great opportunity and a great time to have these discussions. In terms of your typical permitting process, it really does start with a phone call from either Dennis or I, and it's typically either an engineer or a developer or just a property owner who's looking for what they can and can't do with their property. And so, obviously, in the town of Bellingham, there is zoning bylaws that are in place. So these are the laws that were approved at town meeting from the voting public that kind of lays the groundwork for what can be developed at a given location. So we typically, will host a small meeting between either myself, Dennis, and any other applicable departments. So a lot of times, we'll bring in DPW or the building department, sometimes conservation, to give the property owner a real good comprehensive understanding of what can and can't be done on their property. From there, depending on the magnitude of the development, it's either going to be as simple as a building permit, or it can go even further into a rather robust permitting process with our planning board, zoning board, conservation commission, sometimes even with the select board. We will lay out that path to permitting for the property owner or developer and say, this is your path. It's obviously not a guarantee. A lot of these are discretionary permits, and during that time, we work through all the different issues. We being again the different applicable departments that get to weigh in, such as again, if it's a subdivision, a lot of those are heavily resourced on sewer, water, or what have you. So, our great staff at DPW will chime in on different locations to improve water quality, or the stretch of sewer that needs to be done in order for us to add to our system. And of course it goes to our board. So our planning board and our zoning board, our conservation commission, they work with all these developers during public sessions to get the project in accordance with our laws, but also working to improve that development that's on paper to better the community. So I say that in terms of some really good examples I guess we'll go over today. Things like including sidewalks and bike lanes and preserving open space. So we'll get into a lot of those, I'm sure, with these different developments. But that path to permitting, that could take anywhere from a few months to sometimes even a couple years.
Right.
And so there's a lot of work that goes into it. And I'm excited to share some of those developments with you guys.
As we kick off, we have some graphics that we're going to focus on. We have 10 or 12 properties that Jim and Dennis have identified that are part of the north side of town. And Dennis, when Jim mentions that some projects take 2 years, we've got some projects that take 2 decades, such as the old Pearl Mill property. And back in the 80s and 90s, you saw that get started. Maybe you could tell us how it began and where it is going to be in the future.
Sure. The Pearl Street Mill was a property that the town actually took in a tax taking. It was a distressed property. The developer or the owner eventually abandoned the property in, I think, 2003. And the town took that property, and we looked at a whole host of different development opportunities. There was thoughts that we could do some sort of transitional living up there where we would have assisted living and then nursing homes, some skilled nursing. That was something that was very popular back in the early 2000s, and there are other mill sites that were developed in Massachusetts. One out in the Webster area, I forget where exactly it was, we went and visited, and it was an old mill complex, and it was beautifully done, and they actually had early childhood daycare there as well, so the seniors could mix in. And we put several proposals out trying to attract the developer to do something like that. We got permission from town meeting to pursue that type of project, and adopted an overlay district, which allowed us to do it there. The neighbors were happy to see something positive was going to happen with the site, and unfortunately we had a lot of tire kickers, but no one really was able to figure out how you could do that and still make a profit. Obviously it's twofold. The town wants something, and a buyer or a developer is going to look to make sure that they can make it work from a financial perspective. We then went on with other approaches to the property, and ultimately we had to take that old mill site down. That came down probably about 7 or 8 years ago. It was very expensive to take down. We're hundreds of thousands of dollars into that site on top of the tax revenue. We did receive some grant money to assist with it. It is a clean brownfield site now. We did clean it up. It was an old mill that produced garments, and back in the day, I guess you use certain dyes, and the byproducts were just stacked outside and left in piles, and the piles eventually, mixed in with the landscape, and that all had to be removed. So ultimately, we cleaned up the site, and now we're looking at different solar options. Yeah. Finally, we've got a battery storage project that was, again, town meeting authorized us to go forward with leasing the property. And we're looking at solar battery storage. And I'm going to let Jim maybe could describe what solar battery storage means. It's something, everyone knows what a solar project is, but this is something that actually stores excess capacity that's on the grid.
Yeah, so we ran into this topic a few years back, actually, when we were talking about different solar developments in town, and one developer brought up the idea of solar storage, and it really got us thinking creatively. And when we were looking at this site again at Pearl Street, it seemed to make a lot of sense. We were looking at a use that would have minimal impact to the neighborhood, and potentially not take up the entirety of the site, because I think it's an opportunity to clean it up and maybe provide a little bit of public space as well. So, and it just so happened that it's right next to high tension lines and near a substation in Medway. So when we put out a request for proposals to bring in different entities to discuss this solar storage, I think a lot of individuals were excited about it. What it does is really take off that peak energy that's on those high tension lines and store them for opportunities when there's more of a need. So in New England, we have our highs and lows, and so it seems to be a great opportunity for Bellingham, but also Massachusetts, to really level out our energy consumption and storage. And so I think it's going to be a great project for that area, and with minimal impact.
I know you have the graphic up on the screen, right? Can you zoom in a little bit, or what's the physical location of that?
Yeah,
just for the residents, so they know.
Yeah, of course, what we've received is a proposal. We're working with the developer, but what they look like are large trailers, and they're batteries. Very quiet. It'll probably be about 150 feet off of the street, landscape, so you really won't see them. They make absolutely no noise. The state is providing all kinds of incentives to developers to put these projects in, and from the municipal perspective, the revenue that would generate is well in excess of $100,000, I think is what the proposal, or upwards of $100,000 to store these trailers there. And the entire development site, I think that they identified, Jim, was it 20,000 square feet?
Yeah, it was less than an acre. Potentially up to an acre, I think, of future growth perhaps. But but it still left us plenty of upland to
Exactly.
clean up. And
How much
make use.
upland is there at that site?
It does vary, but I want to say closer to 4 acres of actual usable land there.
So it's a small portion, generates a good return to the town that we can actually use to
Right.
beautify that site, finally for the neighbors who have been extremely patient. One of the things that we have going on there right now is we had at our treatment plant in North Bellingham, we backwash these huge filters that we have at the treatment plant, not unlike you do with your swimming pool, and you know the muck comes out. Well, we had an issue with the backwash up there, and we had to dispose of quite a bit of material. That material was put into large trailers, and those trailers were stored at the Pearl Street Mill while they dried out, and they're being hauled out of there. So I know we had calls from some of the neighbors saying, what are those great big trailers that say hazardous waste
Probably concerning, yeah.
logos on them? Is the
Right.
town now turned our Pearl Street Mill site from assisted living to solar to hazardous waste site? No, that's not the case, and those trailers are getting out of there. So
Great.
it's not certainly not a long-term situation. They may all be out of there by now, but that was a topic of concern over the last several months.
So from one clean energy project to another, there was a bit of shock and awe over the removal of all the trees on Maple Street. And one thing that struck me is that most of that land is in Bellingham. I believe it's most of the frontage is on Bellingham on the street itself, but the deeper part is on the Franklin. So maybe one of you can cover what is Bellingham, what isn't, and what it means to the community.
Sure.
Yeah, so that area, that you're right, Michael. That is an interesting location on Maple Street, because that town line does run not too deep beyond Maple Street. There's about a little less than half of that solar development isn't in Bellingham, and the balance is actually in Franklin. And you're right, it was a little bit of a shock, I'm sure, for some of the residents in the area. And I think that this is a good opportunity to really provide some overview of how that takes place. So a solar development, again, just like the solar storage, is a rather benign use in terms of traffic impacts, noise, what have you. But unfortunately, some of these locations, it's true. Trees do come down, and it's unfortunate, especially in a place on Maple Street where we're trying to preserve as many trees as possible. But one of the key things there is the town's undertaking of rezoning all across the board. We're looking at different uses and how they interact with each other and on the ground. And Maple Street for 40, 50 years has been zoned industrial. And as recently as about 4 years ago, the town really took a comprehensive look at what those uses could provide, and try and realign the zoning with the infrastructure. Maple Street is a busy road, and it's rather narrow. We did a great project fairly recently to repave and a slight widening. But that widening is as wide as you're going to get. There's wets on pretty much either side of it. So, additional industrial traffic didn't seem to make the most sense for the future of Maple Street. So the town did a rezoning. They rezoned it to a suburban nature. So any future development will be of a residential type on Maple Street there for much of the corridor. However, this was one location that slightly predated or got in before the rezoning occurred, and it wasn't as simple as just putting solar in. We actually, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the first calls come to Dennis and I, and we talk with our board members about these different types of projects. Development came forward to the planning board for some rather large industrial buildings at that location, a subdivision of land that would create, some potential real large industrial. And so, we came back to the applicant and simply said, we think that may overburden this corridor. Is there something else that, we could work together on? And solar really did seem to come rise to the top there. It was something that the applicant was excited about, and it was something that I think the town in general saw as a positive, because it's fortunately or unfortunately, it's not a matter of development or no development. It's, what can we do best, because each of us as property owners has the ability to develop in accordance with our local laws. So yes, that as we move forward, this solar development will progress. Luckily, through the planning process, the planning board did, I think, provide a great screening that's going to be up there. Typically, the landscaping and the fencing and what have you comes towards the end, but there will be some nice decorative fencing and screening, as well as landscaping there.
I know part of the pre-work to pulling this show together was to identify all the different developments in town, and today, as Michael mentioned, we're focusing specifically on the north end of town. We've touched on the solar farm. I think you've identified at least 10 others. I was wondering if maybe we could just sort of go through those and share kind of the history and kind of where that project stands. We want to just start with the order. Are we going to put this up on the screen at some point? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. The first one you had identified was the Macy Estates. That's a great story in and of itself. Want to walk us through what happened with that development?
Yeah, so Macy Estates, actually, that is a great story. This is one that started, from basically the bottom up, the neighborhood.
Right.
The old school was coming down, and it was what to do with that property next. And so, actually, this was one of those. I had just come on board, and it was getting to meet the neighbors, because we had the neighbors come into the select board meeting,
right.
and we talked about what would be uses that the neighborhood would appreciate or feel comfortable with, and it truly did land on 12 essentially single family lots. We provided the neighborhood with, I believe it was 3 different options at that time. I think we kicked around an assisted living facility, maybe some townhomes, but I think at the end of the day, the thought was, in 10 years, driving down Monique Drive, you wouldn't even know that there was a school there. It just blends in with the neighborhood, and I think I think we achieved that. It was these are lots of comparable size to the neighborhood. Granted, they're newer homes. We were able to preserve the park that's there, which
Right.
I've heard great things about, and it's just a quality addition, I think, to that neighborhood.
Great example of collaboration for sure.
I was thinking that if you're a viewer of this, perhaps you just want to take the list and go for a ride around town at some point.
Right.
Because it'll put things in perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was obviously a very sensitive project, because
Right.
it's a neighborhood school. A lot of people moved into that neighborhood because they grew up there, they came back, and they wanted their children to go to school there.
Right.
But the school was in tremendous disrepair, was going to cost a lot of money, and with enrollment down from where it was when the school was built, didn't make sense to pump that money into it. Instead, we put 12 very nice homes on the tax rolls and preserved some open space.
Yeah.
So I think it was a win-win.
I did speak with Superintendent Morano, because some of the concerns that neighbors have is, look at all the development, how are our schools going to manage? And in our third segment, we're actually going to share some graphics from the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission that shows our residential development or population development through 2030. We also have our own master plan, some of the documents that are in front of us. And basically, we've had declining enrollments. As recently as 7 years ago, we were 300 students higher, so some of the growth, even though we've lost some schools, we'll mitigate that, and we'll cover that in the third segment. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next we have Burton Woods. Who wants to take that one?
So I could start off. So with Burton Woods, this is going to be one of probably a few what we call 40Bs that we'll touch on. So this is a comprehensive permit, and what that means is it's not hitting on all of our local zoning bylaws that I keep touching on. It actually has a framework under Mass General Law 40B, hence the name, and so basically it overrides many of our zoning bylaws, and this is a state law that the town must abide by until such time as the town is at 10% affordable housing. And at this time, as we all know, we have in fact got there to almost 12.6% affordable housing. So that's a great step for the community. And this is one of them that got us there. So this is a 28-unit single-family development off of Sunken Meadow. And if Sunken Meadow doesn't sound familiar to folks, it's because it's in Franklin. So you actually have to access it through Franklin. It's down Pine Street and up Sunken Meadow, and at the end of that cul-de-sac, there was frontage there that brought you back into Bellingham. It sits behind Mohawk in the neighborhood up north. And so we had a robust session with the zoning board. It took about 8 months actually to permit. But at the end of the day, I think the board did a good job of trying to get the best out of a tough situation. As I mentioned, we never like to take in projects that override our local control. But given that it's a mandate, I think the zoning board did a good job of getting working with the neighbors and trying to preserve as much as possible. It abuts the Charles River, and there will potentially be access there to maybe access through canoes or what have you at that location.
Did you say canoes?
Canoes or whatever you do on the river.
Pontoon boat? I don't know.
And it is a project that's under appeal and has been for some time. So how long some of the butters in Franklin did appeal that. So remains to be seen what's going to happen with that project.
Sure. Our next topic, maybe the hottest one in this segment, is what many people feel is the most significant eyesore in the north end of town, described as the Meehan properties. And if you aren't aware what the Meehan properties are, those are the 3 vacant houses across from Sunoco and Dunkin' Donuts at the north end of town.
That were purchased by a gentleman named Meehan.
Meehan, yes, hence the name Meehan Properties.
But I think some of the misconception that I've read about is that people recall that it came to town meeting recently but was withdrawn. There was no vote. So maybe we could back up and explain where we were going into town meeting, and then we can bring the community up to speed as to where we are today.
Sure, and this is one that you've obviously been very much involved in as well. We've met with Mr. Meehan, and we're trying to find out what the best solution for those properties would be. And essentially, 3 properties that were purchased on Hartford Avenue on the corner of that intersection right there with Dunkin' Donuts. We used to call it the four-way stop. Now it's signalized intersection, but it's right there. And 3 properties are abandoned, and the gentleman, Mr. Meehan, would like to put in a gas station and country store there, and met with the neighbors, had community meetings, and sponsored an article to rezone that property for that particular use. Withdrew the article because he didn't feel there was support there before it went to town meeting. So it was on the warrant, and it was passed over at town meeting. And
by passing it over, they can bring it back inside the 2 years.
Bring it back. And I know you've had the 2 of you have had conversations with Mr. Meehan, and he's articulated what he'd like to do up there.
Yeah. Jim, we're also going to talk about WS Development, which is behind Home Depot, but I think some of the bigger discussion is that when I think of the area that we'll call it Exit 18, there is a need for that roadway in that area to be widened, similar to what has been done at Exit 17. And for those watching, there are broad plans to have that road be as wide as 6 lanes in some locations across from outside of the Home Depot entrance, and certainly at least 5 lanes so that you can turn left onto 126 coming from the bridge, or go straight toward Hopedale. We have a graphic of what the Meehan property is intended to look like, but perhaps we can talk about the land that's there, why the houses are still there, and what's being done now to potentially take those houses down and move forward. And obviously, I think the most important thing is whatever happens has to garner neighborhood and community support. It's not a decision that is made arbitrarily by any board, because, as we know, it has to come to town meeting to rezone. But I've said a lot there, but maybe we can fill in the blanks.
Yeah, sure. So you're right, Michael. One of the key aspects of those properties are the frontage. We have been looking kind of holistically on the Hartford Avenue corridor as to what could be done to improve that area of town. And we recognize that it's going to need some slight widening. So the frontage on that side of Hartford Avenue is vital to achieving that. With that being said, that the homes there certainly are a safety concern. We've expressed that to Mr. Meehan and his team. I know the request from the town is for those to be removed as soon as possible. And my understanding is we're working with their team to preserve their rights. And what I mean by that is, whenever you have a property and it's what we term pre-existing non-conforming parcel of land, which means it's slightly smaller than what our local code calls for these days. You preserve your rights if there's a structure there. So that home there is allowed to be there in perpetuity. And if it comes down, it limits the options of the landowner moving forward. However, I think both parties recognize it's a health and safety concern, and we're hoping to work with them to bring those units down and maybe preserving and certainly preserving their ability to maybe put up what's there today, or allow for them some time to seek whatever path to permitting they so choose, in order to achieve maybe that concept they're discussing with the community.
And this is one where we're really trying to collaborate with the property owner,
Right.
and come to some resolution that is acceptable to the immediate abutters. Because if the neighborhood doesn't want it and they're opposed to it and they're going to object to it at town meeting, it's not going to have much traction. But if there are things that we can do to minimize the impact and improve everybody's quality of life up there, and the biggest way to improve quality of life in that particular area is to make the traffic flow better, because
Right.
it's one of the high accident areas that we have in town, and traffic just doesn't flow very well there. And the gentleman who owns that property has made it clear that he would give us whatever we needed for widening or for land acquisition up there to make that roadway wider. So that's the benefit. But as you know, we've made it clear to him that there has to be buy-in from the abutters.
Right.
Interesting. I think we had a sit down with Mr. Meehan and his people, and I think we pretty much called him out on the fact that he made it look terrible to force everyone's hand. And I think it was a case of putting the cart ahead of the horse.
Yeah.
He got a little ahead of himself, thinking that he had clear sailing to move ahead. He's made what I believe is to be an honest attempt to remedy it, but as Jim said, he needs to preserve his rights as well. I think the bigger picture for us is that if we were ever to widen that road, we are going to have to take that land by eminent domain. And as we'll see in our second section of this show, when we talk about the center of town, taking that much land would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars along that strip. And there's no guarantees how we'll proceed, but the arrangement would likely be that we would take that land without cost if the project was to proceed.
Very significant advantage to that, yes,
yeah.
for sure.
So I think what's important for anyone watching this is nothing can be decided without it going to town meeting and having the support of the neighbors. But I think a well-informed community and residents. And to that end, Dennis, I believe he mentioned that he wanted to do something with the residents in the months ahead to educate them on his plans and get their feedback.
Exactly. He may have already reached out to the neighbors there, and we made it extremely clear that no project's going to move forward with widespread opposition
Right.
up there. It just doesn't make sense. It'll have no traction, and he's got to come up with something that's going to work for everybody. Certainly it has its benefits, but he needs to mitigate the impact to the immediate abutters there. They bought property abutting residential homes, and that's their expectation, that they'd be next to residential homes. If he's going to rezone it, he has to mitigate the impact so those people don't feel like they've been compromised.
I know I'm stating the obvious, but the biggest hang-up right now is COVID, obviously.
Sure.
Or we would have had this meeting with the residents months ago when we first had that conversation with them.
It strikes me, we do the Monday show on COVID If people were to have questions that they want, I mean, sometimes we get too close to these things and we don't know what's on people's minds. What would be the best way for people to send in a question to us?
I think we could use the COVID email, the COVID-19 at bellinghamma.org.
Sure, and we'll put that graphic up on the screen.
Sure, and we'll come up with a better email address possibly for our second broadcast, because we do get a lot of emails relative to COVID at the COVID-19, but certainly we review them all, so if we get any in relative to this program, it'd be helpful for our next production.
In an effort to be sensitive to the attention span of our basic viewers, I'm wondering if maybe we should hop in and talk about the Amazon facility. I know there was a lot of work that went into the development of that, and some great success stories now that it's up and fully operational, but maybe you can walk the residents through, Jim, how that came to be.
Yeah, certainly. So as I think we'll probably get a sense, there's a lot of activity going on Maple Street. You know, we've already touched on a little bit about the solar site on Maple Street, and the Amazon facility is certainly you know, a hot topic right now as it's fully operational. You know, this is one, again, that when I first started off talking about our paths to permitting, this was a difficult one. You know, this was one that it's an industrially zoned lot of land. You know, it's a vacant lot of land, though. So, you know, when folks purchase homes and they see beautiful forest across the street, you know, we all hope that it will remain. However, again, it's the property owners have certain rights, and this is an industrially zoned lot of land. With that being said, you know, coming to the planning board, we worked hard in order to try and to improve what was on paper, to provide the surrounding neighborhood with a lot of benefits. So the Amazon facility, as you're cited there, when you drive by Maple Street, you're likely not going to see the building, which was strategic. We wanted to kind of hide it back there. Obviously, you're seeing the vans and trucks driving by doing their deliveries. I'm at fault, as probably everyone here, of getting 2-3 packages a day sometimes.
Busy ordering.
But yes, that is a facility. It's actually a group of residents or occupants there. There's Amazon. There actually is a 7-Eleven tucked back there, a 7-Eleven industrial facility, and I believe Lender's Pretzel. It's a pretzel company back there. You know, those are rather benign, quiet uses as well. And so, you know, we have ongoing dialogue with the Amazon facility, though. So that I think that's important for the general public to know, is if there are any concerns that you do have about the facility, give Dennis and I a call. We're happy to reach out to the Amazon facility. You know, if there's you know, trash or you know, congestion problems. I know, you know, the gas station had some congestion problems, and we talked to them about potentially diversifying where those vans go to fuel up. And my understanding is they're continually working on that. Right. But I think overall, you know, the siting of that, I thought ended up rather well, and I think it is a success story. I mean, when we talk about you know, walking that fine line of new growth and trying to minimize impacts, I think this was a positive.
Dennis, maybe you can speak to the community partnership we have with them. They just made a fairly large donation.
They did. They made a sizable. They've made multiple donations. Actually, they contributed $15,000 to our senior center. They're going to be building a pavilion there and also providing meals for seniors. So that was very helpful. They provided funding also to the fire department for some apparatus that they needed. The entire complex is about a $700,000 a year complex, $700,000 a year taxpayer. And the excise taxes are considerable. I know the board has made a point of saying they want to make sure those vehicles are housed and registered in Bellingham, and the email I got just this morning, 229 excise tax bills were issued for that Amazon property in 2020. And so far, the first commitment this year, there were 88 vehicles that were committed in the first commitment, and the average bill was $600. So obviously, if we do 200,000,
Right.
not 200,000 vehicles,
No.
but if we do 200 vehicles
Right.
at $500 a vehicle, that's $100,000 in
Right.
excise tax, and I think it'll be more than that. So it is considerable.
So that's what we want you to be thinking about when you see all those Amazon trucks out there,
Yeah.
what it actually means
Yeah.
for us as a town.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
We actually don't have it on our list, but the folks at Victory Packaging have been very good neighbors.
Yeah.
I mean, we can acknowledge that there are issues occasionally with trucks going down High Street the wrong way, but they're not necessarily Victory trucks, or they're not Amazon trucks. They're some of the independents that use their GPS. So on North Main Street, you'll see the signs at High Street that says no left turn here,
Right.
because it's their GPS that's taking them away. Guys can be coming from states away.
Not knowing, right.
Not knowing.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, as Cindy noted, there's a lot of community partnership with a lot of these tenants and businesses in town, and Victory's no different. You know, as you mentioned, the signage on High Street, that's from Victory. They recognized there was an issue, and they provided us that signage, and those signs aren't cheap. We were looking at one for another part of town, and they range $15,000 to $20,000 for the solar powered sign.
Wow.
So you know, and Victory didn't budge. When we said, you know, there's something we could partner with, and they said, we'll pay for it if you can put it in there. So and so we did.
Yeah, and those improvements at Maple Street and Route 140 were funded in part with a grant and in large part with mitigation provided by Amazon, the Campanelli facility, and the Victory facility. So it does help from the perspective of improving our infrastructure as well.
We have 3 or 4 more to cover, and one that strikes me that's along the lines of the Amazon thought process is WS Development, also known as the Shops at Bellingham, and I think of the signs that were around town, what about the traffic? And I think it's safe to say that the concept of the shops is dead.
Yeah.
However, the land is still very valuable in the 185 corridor.
Absolutely. The market conditions change. In the early 2000s, these lifestyle centers were all the rage. And I think they're still very popular, but the developer feels that the market's not there now for a project like the Shops at Bellingham. 2003, I think it was first proposed, and they still have that property under agreement. It's all that land behind Home Depot along 495. And they're looking at other options. It's a large tract of land, and obviously they've invested a lot of money in it. And what they do really is, the bottleneck is Hartford Avenue and the traffic. It just can't handle any more traffic without improvements to that corridor. And when I say that corridor, really it's the area from Hartford Ave, Cedar Hill,
Right.
all the way up to the other side of where Walmart is.
Right.
So it's a large area that needs to be improved.
Shows how they're all interconnected, right?
Yep. If you're new to Bellingham, you wouldn't know that they had plans to put on-ramps to 495 through the Walmart parking lot at one point, to reconfigure that. And if you're thinking about the entrance to Home Depot, that could be an access road to the back where they have the rental portions at Home Depot could be a
Right.
roadway to the back. And you know, I don't think we're going to see the hotels and the mixed-use shops, but you know, theoretically we could see another Amazon size, but the traffic would go right out onto Hartford Ave, which does segue into what I think I'm going to put Jim on the spot with the Hartford Avenue study.
Yep. Yeah. So actually, that's a perfect timing because you know, Dennis mentioned with the Amazon facility and providing ample funds to assist with the Maple Street 140 intersection. That's something that you know, the planning board strives to do early on in the process, work with an applicant to leverage private funding. So it would be a public-private partnership, truly in the sense. And so the Hartford Avenue corridor, as we've been hitting on all along, you know, certainly needs widening, and we know this because we've been studying it. We, well before I've got here, the previous applicant with the shops was studying it. They had many meetings with Mass DOT. Obviously, if we're touching an on-ramp or anything, we have to get the blessing of DOT. And so, those dialogues continue on, and currently we're looking at that corridor. Essentially, while we, phase one is probably Cedar Hill to the on-ramp, we are, zooming out and looking at the area over in front of the Whole Foods Plaza and Walmart. But also, we need to be mindful of, Hartford Avenue is a cut-through for many of the communities out west of us.
Bellingham is a cut-through for most people to anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to be mindful of that when we're talking about volume and commuter patterns. And so we're looking at it, and we understand, I think, what needs to be done. Again, we're looking to limit any kind of improvements on the burden on the community, and so how you do that is, again, a partnership. And so if Mr. Meehan or the folks who still have the land where the shops may go one day, or whatever type of development where the shops were proposed, we would look for investment from them and partnerships from them to get that Hartford Avenue improvements done. So
it's very similar to what we saw with Lincoln Properties, the state, and Bellingham partnering to fix the intersection at Rapid Refill. Bellingham is not going to take on a project unless we have deep pockets, which would be, in this case, WS Development, as we had with Lincoln Properties. Makes sense.
Absolutely.
So.
All right, moving right along. Let's see what's next. How about the J.D. Raymond mulch facility? That's always a topic of
It's a lawsuit in the making.
debate. Who wants to take that
I'll
one?
let Jim handle that one.
Well, so again, we're back on Maple Street. As we can see, Maple Street's a busy area, and we're hopeful actually with the J.D. Raymond mulch facility that we can get some positive results moving forward. They're currently before the planning board for improvements to the facility. We brought forward several concerns to them. Had to be 3-4 years ago now, and since that time, we've been hot and cold with the landowner, but there may be some light at the end of the tunnel. They were before the Conservation Commission to improve stormwater, and now they're before the planning board to potentially improve traffic patterns and safety, and hopefully we can get a positive outcome there. So I know there's a lot of concerns there with the folks in the neighborhood, and I think it's important to express that we've heard the concerns, and we're certainly not sitting on our hands doing nothing. We're trying to get to a positive result at that location.
Great.
Interestingly enough, right across the street, just to touch on Maplegate Country Club, if people don't know that, it's the 17th and 18th hole that's in Bellingham, but the bulk of the course is in Franklin. And kudos to the residents of Bellingham for taking on that rezoning out in front, because it really creates a situation where had someone wants to come in and put an Amazon facility in Franklin, that would be a huge burden to Maple Street. And I think the zoning there is beneficial to us right now, because it allows us to have the first voice at the table, as the case may be. But
Right.
Yeah, I think it's consistent with the character there. That section of roadway was rezoned from industrial to residential. I think residential makes sense along that corridor, not necessarily anticipating the golf course was going to look at development. Mr. French, who developed that golf course, passed away a year or two ago, and he's someone who was he made a lot of contributions to Bellingham. People don't know, but he'd show up in my office every year at Christmas time with a sizable check for toy distribution, whatever it was, Toys for Tots or somewhere else. Nice gentleman. But he passed away. The family has the course, and they're looking at some redevelopment. And as you say, Bellingham had previously rezoned that corridor to residential because we felt, industrial, there's quite a bit of industrial there now, probably
Right.
enough, and there needs to be a balance.
Provided us some leverage, and
Sure.
we are going to talk in our future segments about the status of Bungay Brook and the Bonvie property at New England Country Club, but for the balance of this segment, Jim, next up we've got 5 lots on Maple and Pine Oak, which from my notes that reminds me of the Hiltz property, the welding, welder right at the corner there.
Exactly right. You nailed it. So that is the old Hiltz property. Folks may not have realized, but yeah, there was a nice welding shop back there, as well as 2 residential homes up front. And so what the current property owner has looked to do is it honestly is not a great location for a welding shop, any further. There's homes all around it.
Right.
So they converted that. There's a lot of land actually back there. So he was able to put where the old 2 houses are, they're putting 2 new houses. So taking the old ones down, putting 2 new ones, and then putting 3 nice houses in the rear there. So ultimately it ends up being 5 single-family homes. Much like the solar just down the street, it comes a little bit of a shock. You're driving down Maple Street and you see some trees coming down, but hopefully, over time, the homeowners come in and they replant to
Right.
what's appropriate for the new lot.
And Jim, our last item on the list I'm not even familiar with, 0 South Maple Street.
Yeah, this one's hot off the press. This is before the planning board right now, and so
Got to get a better address for that property.
I know, I've never seen something with a 0.
well, you'll see it once we pull it up on the satellite. Why it's 0. So that's premier equipment. It's a really nice operation at the end of South Maple Street, and right in front of it there you'll see a bunch of trees, and those trees are where 0 South Maple is. It's actually a small lot of land. When we with some of these developments, it may even catch us off guard that, hey, that's a developable lot of land, and you got to go through a land use history process, and lawyers get involved and all that, but they have done that, and they provided us with ample information that does prove that there is a buildable lot of land right there. Again, it's zoned industrial. So that's before the planning board right now. We're looking at it. This is, this is how these developments get completed. They're before planning board. There's no wetlands in the area, so conservation wouldn't be involved in this one. We're looking at, how it impacts the residential neighborhood nearby. Maplebrook is right there, so
Right.
the board is obviously sensitive to that, and even things like some holistic changes, like they have a loading dock that's closest to residential, and we simply say, look, again, the goal is to always partner with these folks, and so if there's an opportunity to move that loading dock to the other side, limit noise, 10 years from now we won't be getting calls from the folks at Maplebrook with concerns there. So hopefully, this can be a positive addition to the community with some slight changes, and we'll see how it progresses.
I'm going to lob something over to Dennis as we wrap up this series, first series. Can you speak to the residents about how this has been one of our biggest years yet in terms of new business growth, and how that is a very big positive for our residents in terms of the effect on their real estate taxes?
Sure.
Maybe talk about the split tax rate too, if you could.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of concern about the economy and the downturn in the economy that we've seen over the past year because of the pandemic. But one of the things that we've seen is interest rates are low.
Right.
Developers have been extremely busy. We've had quite a few projects, as Jim mentioned, this past year. The town's tax base grew by $1.5 million. I mean, that is a substantial increase, and I'm not talking about what's allowed under Proposition 2.5. I'm talking about new growth, new properties that have come on to the tax rolls, and that was one of the bigger years that we've had. Part of it was some of the industrial development. A lot of it was residential development. Bellingham does have a split tax rate, which means that the business community pays more per thousand. The tax rate on an industrial or commercial property is about $20 per $1,000 of value. On a residential property, it's about $14 per $1,000 of value. So typically communities don't look at a split tax rate like that unless they have enough commercial and industrial property to support it. Because if 5% of your community is industrial or commercial and you split the tax rate, you're not going to have any new businesses coming in because it's going to be exorbitant. But our split is about 65-35, in that range, high 60s and 35% commercial industrial. So it does work for us. We adopted it in the early 2000s. And there's a trade-off. People pick a community based on what they can afford in many instances. Schools obviously come into play, but Bellingham has maintained itself as being an affordable community. And the trade-off is we do have some commercial and industrial impacts, more so than Sherburne or Dover or more rural communities that have a much higher tax rate. Bellingham's, if you go to the Department of Revenue's website, you'll see that Bellingham has the lowest residential tax burden in the region. The average residential tax bill, and that's what we look at, not so much the rate, but what does the average homeowner pay, is the lowest in the region. The next lowest in our region, and when I say our region, I'm talking, you can go Blackstone Valley, you can go Metro West. The next lowest is $500 higher than what the average homeowner in Bellingham pays.
That's
that
significant.
Has a lot to do. Yeah, that's significant.
$500,
that has a lot to do, and that's that is, we are the lowest, and then the next lowest is there. The average is a couple $1,000s more than what the average bill is here, and those are Department of Revenue statistics that are published every year. So
I know, I was blown away by that when I first learned that.
Yeah, you can go to the site and see those numbers. We say them, and people say, really? And then you can go see it for yourself. So there's a trade-off, and we know that.
So as we wrap up the first of what we plan to be three things, some of the things that we hope to bring following up on this. In our third segment, we were talking about adding some information about senior citizen benefits, where you can save money, as part of our third segment to wrap it up. We also plan to bring you data on school enrollment. And in front of us is our coffee table reading. And we've been busy. Dennis and Jim have been busier, obviously. Some of the things that are on our website that can back up what we've been talking about. We have our Bellingham Housing Production Plan, our Hazard Mitigation Update. We recently completed the 2020 Master Plan, which is done every 10 years?
Every 10 years.
Every 10 years. Metropolitan Area Planning Commission Resilient Building Workshop. We have the Route 140 Corridor Study.
Open Space Plan.
Open Space Plan. And this is everything that is available on our website to reference. So the facts are out there. We're pleased to bring this to you, obviously. So I thank Dennis Frayne and Jim Cupper for joining us.
We'll be back next to talk about the center of town.
Sure.